Hey expats and travelers, we did it. We bought a property, finally. There were a lot of emotions that we felt, and the one that we're feeling right now is simply relief. It was as emotional as going for a ride on the Goliath at Six Flags. We started this whole thing with an idea that we turned over to you, our viewers. And it turned into a strict search, mini group calls, 10 updates to the short list of people who wanted to be part of the vertical community venture, a pretty simple negotiation, a few mistakes on my part that I want to warn you about, and a brilliant team that got this deal over the line and a smile back on our faces. So while this feels like the end of something, it's also the beginning. I'll get more into that in a bit, but I want to catch you up to speed and tell you the story of how we got here. Maybe you'd like to do something like this too. Well, I want to shorten your learning curve. Maybe you're just in it for the entertainment. You've seen this series and you've been rooting us on, cheering for us to fail, or screaming for us to run the other direction from some of these properties. I don't know, but I've got a story to tell you. And like most stories, let's start at the beginning. In February of 2022, we started talking about this idea to circumvent a lot of the problems that we saw our friends go through when they bought an apartment in Portugal. They would get this cool renovated apartment, move in, and then the problems would start. They realized their apartment wasn't insulated well, the plumbing was done poorly, the neighbors had a leak, and it took months to resolve. Wait a second, that also happened to us in our rental. They'd have other unit owners list the property on sites like Airbnb, which meant they had tons of new guests making noise and strange people coming in and out of buildings at all hours of the day. All of these problems led us to put our heads together. We realized there were two main problems in buying apartments in Portugal. Number one, the building was the thing that was really unreliable. The unit could be super nice and pretty, but if the building had bad insulation and plumbing and an old roof, you're kind of stuck in a way. Yes, there are condominium fees that take care of large maintenance things, but in general, it takes time to upgrade these buildings. So if you buy a building and make sure it's top-notch through renovating, you can mitigate a lot of these risks. You can get behind the walls and upgrade the plumbing, electrical, and insulation and ensure that you have a good unit for years to come. The second thing is that if you're buying with a bunch of other people that are like-minded, that are interested in living in the units rather than renting it out to the highest bidder on the short-term market, you'll have a better chance of a positive social dynamic in the building. During our process, the government more or less took care of the second problem with legislation, essentially that says you can't rent on the short-term market if at least one of the owners in the building formally complains about it. In early April 2022, we posted our first video in this series, and the call to action was simple. If this sounds good to you and you'd like to join us, email me. Well, the response was pretty overwhelming. We were looking for a building with 4 to 8 units, and since we were going to occupy one of them, we needed 3 to 7 neighbors. We had over 40 people write to us after that first video. In May 2022, we had several episodes of the series published, and we had a growing shortlist. How did people get added to the shortlist? You would email me about your interest, I would email you back a questionnaire along with a lot of information and the search criteria or buy box that we had, and then you would tell us how interested you still were from 1 to 10. 10 being, I'm ready to roll with you guys like the guys from Fast and Furious. At the end of May, we had 3, let's call them families, that were 10s and ready to invest with us. We had several meetings and I started looking at buildings. And that's when the problems started to arise. We took a look at a building on Rua de Bonfim that wasn't too far up the hill, and it was very close to the metro, Campo 24 de Agosto. The property was a good size with a small but nice garden. However, the footprint of the property was too small for our criteria. You see, one of the families wanted at least 100 square meters all on the same floor, and they were adamant about not having internal stairs in the unit, at least at this point. Okay, something that you have to realize about buildings in downtown Porto is they're narrow and long, and a lot of them don't have building footprints of 100 square meters. We were looking for a house that could be converted into apartments, so we knew there would need to have to be modifications made to the internal structure of the building to fit stairs and possibly an elevator, which will reduce the size of the unit's floor plans even more. I saw a few more properties that I didn't film or publish until episode 6. I saw a ridiculously cool property that had an even more ridiculously horrendous smell. This was one that was littered with problems, but it did have a massive garden out back with tons of potential to expand. Oh yeah, it was on our favorite street in the whole city. I took this one back to the group and there was a decent amount of fear regarding the condition of the property and the price. I agreed, although from an emotional point of view, I really liked this one. By the way, I saw this property in April of 2022 despite that video coming out in August. I made the decision not to film any more walkthroughs unless things got serious with the property because I didn't want to bore you with yet another walkthrough and a tease of, it might be the right one for us. That could have gotten exhausting like another season of The Walking Dead. Wait, I saw that house. From May to August, I looked at a lot of properties, and with each passing visit, I grew more and more tired, knowing that opportunities were passing us by as we had to reject a lot that didn't fit our nearly impossible buy box. Why was it impossible? What we were looking for just simply didn't exist on the market. There was virtually no inventory for the size footprint we needed with a garden in this particular neighborhood at the price we needed it at. I knew what needed to be done, but I couldn't do it. I needed to let one of the families go. Their criteria was holding us back. I chose to hold out due to loyalty. It's something important to me. If someone says they're going to roll with you, you make sure to have their back and their best intentions too. So I didn't cut this family out. I think it's worth pointing out that nobody was financially invested with us at this time. But speaking of financial investments, I got a message from them on WhatsApp on September 13th, 2022, off the back of what was a terrible time for the US market. This family was out. They had suffered some serious degradation in their financial resources. And like that, they wished me and Kalie well, and that freed me up to change our search criteria and revisit some of the properties that were eliminated before. As I got back out there to discover what's good, I realized the power of a PIP. What's a PIP? A PIP is basically a project approval made by Town Hall, which is the approval that you'll need to do your project. You can buy properties with these things as part of the purchase. The downside to a PIP is that many sellers want extra money for their property because it adds some intrinsic value to it. Let's say that you're buying a building that has 200 square meters, but the project approval says that you can add a couple floors and now the new building's volume will be 500 square meters. Many sellers will want to list and price their property as 500 square meters rather than what it is existing. I'm really conflicted about how I feel about this. On one hand, I get it. They did some work and spent some time getting a project developed where they got plans approved by Town Hall. On the other hand, they're still selling a physical building of 200 square meters that's in rough shape. Basically, you're buying the future and not the present. And that's a lot like speculation to me, and I don't like that. Now, something great about a PIP is that it gives you an approval framework to reference for your project. It's my understanding that even if you don't want to design the units exactly like the PIP shows, you can make modifications, and as long as it fits within the predetermined boundaries, you're good to go. Meaning you don't have to wait months or even years on City Hall's approval to start your project. That leads me to about this time last year. I checked out two properties on the same street. They were about a block away from each other, and they were around the same volume and both in the area of Bonfing that we love. And they also had PIPs. That's great, right? Yes. Now, here's the gut punch. One of them was a bit too small on the PIP to fit the number of units that we needed to get the price where we needed it. The other was too expensive. The owner wasn't budging. He had this property in the market for well over 3 years and got no bites near his asking price. I put in a verbal offer and it was rejected out of hand with no counter. He told his realtor that he bought the property for $480,000 and had already rejected an offer of $500,000. He said he wouldn't negotiate on the price, and at the price I offered, he'd just do the project himself. To me, I'm like, do the project then. I moved on. In the midst of all of that, we picked up another 10 out of 10 buyer replacement, but then we had another 10 out of 10 buyer drop out. She had never been to Portugal before. She was living in Mexico as a freelance writer. Portugal seemed like a great change for her. However, after she visited, an opportunity to work with a friend of hers in France came up and she left. Part of me felt like things were crumbling and I wanted to cry like Lucy. But I knew two things. One, that the right building was out there. And two, it's getting easier the less voices that there are. So now with 3 definite families, it allowed me more options to examine, but the financial approach was changing. We were going to do this with cash, but now it seemed more likely that we were going to need to have a mortgage up front. Yet another blessing and a curse, which I'll explain in a bit when I warn you about mortgages and banks on the acquisition side. Now we're moving to the beginning of 2023. I've just seen the property that we showed you in last episode, episode 9, the walkthrough of the $400,000 dump. Yet another property that you said, run! Look, the harsh reality is that a lot of old properties in Porto and Portugal are like this. They need a ton of work. There's a lot wrong with them. They're not new properties. They're old. They're in ruin. Some might think they're like the house from the money pit. But others look at them as a diamond in the rough, an opportunity. A lot of these old buildings need a second chance, and a lot of buildings in Porto are getting a second chance of life. We need to recover these things before it's too late. With modern engineering, it can happen. After the walkthrough of this property, I didn't even film it, to be honest with you. I did take some pictures. I didn't feel good or bad about it, I felt indifferent. I had seen 20 properties at this point, and on paper, this one fit the criteria pretty well, but it didn't speak to me, yet. Then I received this on January 16th, 2023. What? On January 13th, we were talking about doing the country a favor and being able to have extra units to rent, possibly to D7 folks. We agree it's a good idea, and then bam. Okay, and then there were 2. With that, I started looking at much smaller projects. 2 to 3 units to be fit into an old single family house. I was only looking at properties with a PIP because I had already spent a year searching for something, and I didn't want to buy something that I would need to sit on for another year or more waiting for project approvals. I saw some more properties with Teresa from Savvy Cat Realty. She was actually the one that first showed me the $400,000 dump. She really ramped up her efforts to show me or find me as many options as possible. After exhausting another list, it was February 2023, and I was feeling like we should pull the trigger on something as several properties worked for what we were looking for. Lo and behold, the property that made the most sense when we revisited it was the $400,000 dump. Why? The opportunity, the PIP, the uniqueness and scale of the project, and the ability to finance it on our own. This is where Rafael, Teresa, and João, our team, all played a tremendous role. Rafael, our rockstar mortgage broker, walks us through the process the same way that he would for any client. He explains to us what the banks will need for us to get quotes. We submit all that information and start getting quotes coming in based on our 2021 taxes. Now at this point, we hadn't filed our 2022 taxes, which later we would realize its importance because it almost blew up the deal and caused us to lose our deposit. Teresa starts negotiating with the sellers of the property. Something important to know about this property is that there are multiple owners on the deed. They don't all live in Portugal. In fact, only one of them resides in Portugal, but he's in Braga. Most critically to note is that they didn't have a realtor involved. So in reality, if this deal was going to get done, it was going to get done without a real estate agent. Teresa is a real estate consultant, not really an agent. But essentially, you can do a real estate deal with just owners and the lawyers. Is it recommended? Probably not, because there's a higher probability that something could go wrong. And here's what went wrong for us. Communication was very scattered. The owners communicated, although it felt slow at times. They probably felt the same way about us too. There were no realtors for Teresa to be dealing with. There was no true single point of contact for João, our lawyer, to discuss things with. So many messages got sent around from this owner and the other owner. It was hard to keep track of who said what and what documents they sent. I very stupidly responded to some of these emails from the owners and inserted myself. I, in fact, was trying to push the process and the project forward. That was a good thing, but it was also bad. The good thing is that I stayed in daily contact with my team, but the bad thing is that I was yet another voice and person in an ever-growing chain of emails that just continued to muddy the waters. So, here's how the signing of the promissory contract, or CPCV, went. Kalie and I negotiated to put a large down payment to secure the CPCV. It's customary to do around 10%. This payment comes with quite a bit of weight and responsibility. Basically, if we backed out of the contract, they'd keep our deposit. Now, we didn't mind paying 20% or more because we knew that we wanted this place and that we were approved for a loan, so we were fine with it. The problem was our assuredness of the loan, or being able to fund the deal by using private money, caused me to go against both João's and Rafael's recommendation of 90 days to close. We said that we could and would close the property in 60 days. This was idiotic and probably pretty pointless. It caused us way too much stress in the end. We could have done 90 days to be safe, and there wouldn't have been any issues. So why did we do it? We wanted to show how serious we were about the property and how fast we were going to be able to close, because the sellers had a deadline coming up, so they wanted to exit the property. And two ways for us to show our seriousness were with the deposit percentage and our closing time. We wanted to make a lower than list offer, and we thought that this would sweeten the deal. It worked, but it ultimately turned out to be a nightmare. When the CPCV got signed here in Portugal, we were attempting to transfer money from the US via Millennium, because it of course landed during a trip that we had already planned back to the US. To spare you the details, we had a few issues, but actually found that doing our Portuguese banking while in the US was easier than banking from Portugal to our US bank accounts. Do we over-regulate banking in the US? You betcha. We didn't magically have a bunch of euros, so we should probably tell you about a banking service that we used and that you should consider using too. As many of you know, we're huge fans of Wise, but we didn't use Wise for this. We could have, but there's a service we felt even more comfortable with since we were sending a large chunk of money, and one that we believe saved us a little extra money in the end, considering we were transferring $100,000 over to Portugal. There's a bespoke service called Spartan FX. We had a representative, shout out to Neil, who helped us set up the account, make a micro deposit from our US account into our account in Spartan FX, and then when we were ready to make the big transfer, he actually got on the phone with us. Okay, it was a WhatsApp call, but you get the point. When we were ready to convert the money from USD to euros, he was there. We also gave him a go-ahead to transfer the money from our Spartan FX Euro account to our Millennium Euro account so we could pay the seller deposit. If you'd like to learn more about Spartan FX, there's a link in the description section, or you can ask Kalie at info@expatseverywhere.com for an introduction. We joined their affiliate program since we had such a positive experience personally. Okay, so over the course of the next 2 days, we made some really large equal transfers from our personal account to 3 Portuguese bank accounts because each of the owners needed to receive a portion of the deposit. It felt like there had to be a lot of trust there. And João assured me that the Portuguese law protected us, and we believe and trust in João. Okay, so that hurdle went pretty well. Next was moving from the pre-approval stage of the loan to the actual loan application process. Again, I'll spare you the granular details, but I'll say 2 things. 1, banks are a nightmare, and 2, they're also weirdly a blessing. Here's why banks need exactly 1.3 million documents to process the loan. Okay, it's not actually 1.3 million, but hear me out. All of those documents are rather important in the sense that the bank is making sure that the property is clear and exactly what you think you're buying. Now, think about this. You're essentially partnering with the bank on a real estate transaction. They're buying the house. It's their money that you're using. They have to make sure that in case you default for whatever reason, that they're going to get a house with a clean title and the one that you said that you were actually buying. This might not be the case in an owner-to-owner transaction. Yeah, you'll have a lawyer, but lawyers can mess up. Banks tend to have so many checks and balances that they don't. The downside is that they take their good old time. You're one in 1,000 other people that they're processing a loan for. You're a small fish in a big pond. The second most nerve-wracking part, I haven't gotten to the most nerve-wracking part yet, was when we were on a transatlantic cruise traveling back from the US to Europe when I got this message. Okay, so where are your tax returns? What do you mean? You have our tax returns. I have your 2021 tax returns. I need your most recent.
Those are our most recent. We haven't filed yet because we're living abroad and have filed an extension.
The banks need your 2022 tax returns or they're not going to process your loan.
Oh my gosh.
If you're anything like me, you hate doing your taxes. Maybe you put them off to the last minute. It wasn't our plan to put them off to the last minute, but we hadn't planned to do them while we were on the cruise. We were going to likely gather some documents while on the cruise and then submit stuff when we got home to Porto. After all, this was April and our extension was until June. The process had other plans. Let me remind you that we're in the thick of tax deadline day for regular tax citizens. We had an extension filed and our tax guy was not expecting us to write, but I wrote. I hated having to email him about this, but it was dire. It was super necessary. If we didn't get these taxes done, there's not a snowball's chance that we were gonna make the closing date. In less than 24 hours, Stephen Bush, our tax guy and hero, responded, "I got you, send me your stuff." The "our stuff" was a bit of an issue because we were in the middle of the Atlantic with tragic internet connectivity as Elon hasn't figured out Starlink out there just yet. It's decent at times, but not flawless. It took us about 3 days to get everything together and sent over to Stephen's team, and they turned it around in about 36 hours, which was crazy fast. We're grateful. Thank you, Stephen. So here's where things got funny in a good way. Before seeing our 2022 taxes, the bank didn't love us. We were okay to them. Maybe they were indifferent to us. After seeing our 2022 taxes, they loved us. They wanted to loan us even more money than they originally said. We gladly took it as we felt we'd need the extra cash, and in the end we were right. Why did they love us? We simply showed more income in 2022 than we did in 2021. Our debt to income ratio looked better. Okay, so the next challenge we faced while still on the cruise was that we needed to open a bank account with the bank we got the loan from. Our lawyer, João, wasn't in Portugal at the time. He was traveling. And since this needed to be done quickly, we ended up using a lawyer that Rafael recommended, as she had done this remotely for other clients. It was easy, and in the end around 450 euros for that. We had to physically mail a copy of the POA to her to open the bank account. In the end, I had to do this when I got back to Portugal. She set everything up and had all the paperwork done. She just needed that document to finalize things. The day we flew back from Barcelona, where the cruise ended, to Porto, I jumped on an hour train ride to Aveiro, where I had coordinated with her to get her the document. I literally stepped off the train, handed her the document, and a few minutes later was on the next train back to Porto. Mission accomplished. The next challenges came in the weeks leading up to the CPCV deadline date. Emails had a 24-hour lag. They'd email needing this document, we'd provide it. 24 hours later, we need that document. We say, you already have it. This went on for what felt like an eternity. How are banks here not more organized? Isn't there a checklist in a platform where these things get filed into a certain place? We still need to set our closing date for the signing of the deed. This, I've been told, can take some real time, and anytime you're working with a bank, they basically call the shots. Time, day, location. The owners of the property had changed their tone of their emails from chill and Portuguese to angry and slightly German. Okay, not German, but you know the way German sounds, right? Like reading their emails look like German sounds. Nein! Come to find out, the owners had a deadline. They all planned to be in Portugal for the week of the signing, and after that, all of them would be out of the country just after the CPCV deadline date. They were heading on holiday, or vacation, as we Americans call it. My anxiety was growing. I had painted myself into a corner. I said I was going to deliver a briefcase full of money on or before a certain day, and that day was rapidly approaching. Okay, it wasn't a briefcase, but rather a cashier's check, but you get the point. It was too late for me to try to get private money, which I've done in the past on real estate deals in the US. It was this loan or nothing. And by nothing, I mean we lose our deposit. And if we lose our deposit, by the way, we lose the dream of this project, as we simply wouldn't have enough cash to try to do this all over again. For multiple reasons, the bank continued to push the signing date back, and we missed the CPCV deadline date. I was gutted. I was beyond stressed. I was beyond frustrated. I had done this to myself and my family. I had put us in this position. It was all me. All the meanwhile, every Portuguese person, except maybe the sellers, remained very calm. I mean, even the sellers had to have remained calm because they didn't pursue the legal avenue necessary to keep our money. Actually, Kalie was calm as well, so I guess I was the only one majorly stressing out. As Joao explained it, it's not like a CPCV deadline date comes and passes and that means the owners get to keep the buyer deposit. There's a very formal and fairly long bureaucratic process that takes place in part to protect the buyer. For once in my nearly 3 years in Portugal, Portuguese bureaucracy for the win, baby. And then in the middle of June, we get that email, the name of the notary, the day, and the hour. The location is a 4-minute walk from our house, which was shocking because it felt like every decision the bank made it difficult for us. But here they were making something easy for us for once. The day, São João, Friday, June 23rd, 2023. The hour, noon, which was plenty of time for me to drop our daughter off at school and go to the bank with Kalie to give whatever last-minute blood samples we had to give. So it's São João and also the day of our deed signing, and funny enough, it is about 11:20. Deed signing supposed to happen at 12, so 40 minutes away. Just finished walking the dog. Hot day. Still, not everything is done, not everything is ironed out. We're waiting on BPI to send something, some number, I think, like mortgage payoff to Novo Banco, which is where we're getting our mortgage. And then Novo Banco asked us to go in and sign something basically authorizing that they can debit the money out of our account. But we don't know what that amount is, so the holdup now is from BPI's side. Nobody seems to be that bothered to get things done in a timely manner or on time, and therefore we're in this situation, which I'm sure a lot of people get in this situation on. Surprisingly enough, I'm calm. I think I knew that something dumb was going to happen today, and sure enough, this is the first dumb thing that's happened today, but there's probably going to be more. All right, shirt change, obviously, as I sweated through the first one this morning. Like I said, it's kind of hot, mid-80s already. As we're walking to the bank to establish our PIN codes for our cards, because our cards are so new, we got a message saying, go to the bank and do the thing between BPI and Novo Banco. So perfect timing, really, because we're already on the way.
Okay, we are now walking with our bank representative to the notary office where we are to sign everything, and he has the checks and everything, so he's walking with us.
Now, while at the signing, there were a ton of people in there. Our lawyer, Teresa, Marco to act as a translator, Rafael's wife, and our friend Flavia, and one of the seller's lawyer, because the other sellers weren't in the country, so they needed the power of attorney, which we agreed to pay for, by the way, because we messed up the timing on things, and we gladly paid not to get any more German emails. That was another 400 euros. There was also this random dude from the bank that carried the checks up the street to the notary while we walked up there. He actually played a much more active role than we expected. I mean, he looked like a regular guy, but so regular that he looked like he was just chosen off the street to represent the bank. There was no suit, no tie, no white-collared shirt, just an envelope, a smoke, as we walked together from the bank to the notary's office. And then there was the notary. Not everyone could fit into the office, so Flavia waited outside. The meeting was scheduled for noon, but we entered the office around 12:45 when they said it was go time. We exited the building a little more than an hour later. Owners of a new, but very old home in Porto, Portugal. A sense of relief, joy, and pride washed over us, or at least it did me. We had bought properties before in the States, a pretty decent amount actually, and apart from our first time each, with each passing home purchase, the less emotional each transaction was. This one felt different. It wasn't the feeling of buyer's remorse though. It was the feeling of a journey. It was a feeling of deep accomplishment. When we first moved abroad in 2009, we were on very low wages and living in some big expensive cities like Madrid, Singapore, and to a lesser degree Busan. We didn't feel like we were ever going to be able to afford to buy abroad. It was also the feeling of the end of something and the beginning of something else. We finished the insane search and purchase process, and now we're beginning the renovation and redevelopment process. We're ending this series on this channel after 10 episodes, and we're beginning a new series on a new channel called Let's Get Building with Josh and Kalie, where we can make content dedicated to buying, renovating, and living in a property in Porto, Portugal with our viewers, with you. So there's one thing left for you to do. Subscribe to that channel and let's get building.